All right, let's go. Number 10. The largest insect wings ever found. The object is part of a wing. 14 centimeters of it survive, pressed into fine gray rock, cataloged as MCZ4024 at Harvard. It came out of a quarry near Elmo in Kansas in 1937 from beds laid down about 290 million years ago. Frank Carpenter described it 2 years later. He had spent much of his career on the insects of that one quarry, and he could see at once that the proportions were wrong. It is the base of a single forewing. From the venation, the complete wing comes out at around 33 centimeters, doubled across a thorax. That gives a wingspan close to 71 centimeters. No insect wing in the fossil record has ever beaten it. The rest of the animal has never been found. No thorax, no abdomen, no head, no legs. A second fragment turned up in Oklahoma 3 years later, and it is another wing. The body length of 43 centimeters, printed under every illustration of Meganeuropsis permiana, is calculated from wing-to-body ratios in its relatives. What we have is one broken wing and an inference drawn off it. It was not a dragonfly. And the difference is structural. These animals sit in the Meganisoptera, an order outside the dragonflies rather than inside them. There is no pterostigma, the pigmented weight along the leading edge that damps flutter in a modern wing. And no notice, the hinge that lets a living dragonfly camber each wing on its own. The word for them is griffinfly, coined in 2005 largely to stop people calling them dragonflies. What they did is clearer than what they were. In 2018, Andre Nell and colleagues described a related griffinfly in scientific reports. Its compound eyes are hugely enlarged and meet across the top of the head. The legs are heavily spined, and the thorax is skewed forward into the arrangement that turns a pair of legs into a basket. That is a hawker. It took prey in the air, in daylight. A predatory insect the width of a dinner plate. Working a Permian riverbank in bright sun is a genuinely disturbing thing to picture. For a century, there was one explanation for the size, and the explanation was the air. Models put Paleozoic oxygen somewhere between 30 and 35% against 21 today. Insects have no lungs and nothing in the blood to carry oxygen. They pipe it straight into the tissue through tracheae, and that plumbing has to grow faster than the body. Richer air buys a larger insect. In 2007, Alexander Kaiser's team measured those tubes inside living beetles under a synchrotron beam. They did scale disproportionately. But here's where the explanation starts coming apart. Reared in air at 31% oxygen, dragonflies come out about 15% larger. 15% is a real effect. It is nowhere near the distance between a 71 centimeter griffinfly and the 19 centimeter span of the largest dragonfly alive. Then, the timing broke. In 2012, Matthew Clapham and Jared Carr ran 10,000 fossil wing measurements against the modeled oxygen curve. The two track each other for 200 million years. Around 150 million years ago, they separate. And they separate the wrong way. Oxygen climbs. Maximum insect size falls. Birds appear in the same window. The last support went in March 2026. In Nature, a team measured the finest air tubes inside the flight muscle of 44 insect species. Those tubes fill under 1% of that muscle, and the fraction barely rises across a 10,000-fold range of body mass. The system is nowhere near capacity. One of the authors was John Harrison, senior author on the beetle study 19 years before. The wing has not moved. It is 14 centimeters of Kansas rock in a drawer in Massachusetts. And the animal it came off is still the largest flying insect this planet has produced. What came apart is the reason we gave ourselves for it. And it came apart from inside the laboratory that built it. Number 9. The reptile that grew wings out of its skin. Every gliding vertebrate alive today solves the problem with parts it already owns. A flying squirrel stretches loose skin between wrist and ankle. A colugo stretches more of it, out to the fingers and the tail. The most elegant version belongs to the Draco lizards of Southeast Asia, which swing out a set of enormously elongated ribs and open a membrane across them like a fan. Ribs are what a reptile has available. Ribs are what gets used. In 1997, Eberhard Frey, Hans-Dieter Seuss, and Wolfgang Munk published a short paper in Science on a late Permian reptile from Germany, and the wing in it was not made of ribs. The rock is the Kupferschiefer, a thin, black, copper-bearing marine shale that runs under central Germany and has been mined since the Middle Ages. Skeletons come out of it flattened to the thickness of paper and almost perfectly complete. The specimen that settled the argument is catalogued SMNKPAL2882, collected at Elric in the Old Mansfeld district, and described in detail by Adam Pritchard and colleagues in the journal PeerJ in 2021. It is about 255 million years old, from the closing stage of the Permian. The skull is barely 6 centimeters long. The claws are curved and the tail is long, and a row of hollow horns flares out sideways from the back of the head, like a crown. Along each flank lies a row of long, slender, bony rods. They are not ribs. Pritchard's team put it flatly. These are dermal bones, unrelated to the axial skeleton, unknown in any other gliding reptile. They lie outside the belly ribs. They never articulate with the spine at any point along their length, and many of them are more than 4 times the length of the thigh bone. They are hollow. They are bones that grew inside the skin for one purpose, in one family, and nothing else in the history of vertebrates has ever done it. That is an extraordinary thing for a skeleton to do, and it happened exactly once. Opened out, they carry a membrane wider than the animal is long. The family was not a single freak, either. Hatzegopteryx turn up in Germany, in Russia, and in Madagascar, across a Permian world that was still one continent. And they carry the same rods everywhere they appear. Whatever the arrangement was for, it worked well enough to spread across a supercontinent. This is the oldest known gliding vertebrate. That claim needs the standard caution, because an absence in the fossil record is not a proof. But nothing older has been found. It is earlier than the first pterosaur by more than 20 million years. It is earlier than the first bird by more than 100 million, and earlier than the first bat by 200, before anything with a backbone had worked out how to fly. Something in a forest in what is now central Germany had already worked out how to leave the ground on purpose. Then it ends. The Hatzegopteryx do not cross the end of the Permian, about 252 million years ago, in the largest extinction the planet has ever recorded. The great majority of marine species go with it, and most of what was living on land goes too. When gliding reptiles reappear in the Triassic, in a family called the Quetzalcoatlus, the membrane is back on ribs. The same answer the Draco lizards are using in the canopy right now. The skeleton is in a museum in Karlsruhe, complete enough to count the rods one at a time. The design is not repeatable, because no lineage since has grown a bone in its skin to fly with. And none has tried. The first flying vertebrate we have was not an early draft of anything that followed. It was a finished idea that the world only ever had once. Number 8. Pterodaustro. There is a low hill in San Luis province, in central Argentina, where the floor of a Cretaceous lake lies exposed as pale, flat rock. It is called Loma del Pterodaustro. Out of roughly 50 square meters of it have come more than 750 specimens of one pterosaur. Eggs, embryos, hatchlings, juveniles, half-grown animals, and adults. Nothing like it exists for any other flying reptile anywhere in the world. José Bonaparte named the animal in 1970, and the name means wing from the south. The rock is about 105 million years old. The lower jaw curves upward like a blade. Out of it rise up to 1,000 filaments, each around 30 millimeters long and 0.3 of a millimeter across, packed so tightly that the whole jaw reads as a single gray comb. The first 7 sit in individual sockets and are thicker than the rest. Everything behind them runs in one continuous groove, except they are not bristles. In 1996, Louis Chiappe and Anusuya Chinsamy published a paper in Nature titled simply Pterodaustro's True Teeth. The point was settled again in 2023 by Ignacio Cerda and Laura Codorniu in the Journal of Anatomy, who cut sections through them and found the full architecture in each one: an enamel sheath, a dentine core, a distinct pulp cavity. They are 1,000 ordinary reptile teeth, drawn out until every one of them is a hair, and it never replaced them. Reptiles grow new teeth throughout life, pushing the old ones out from underneath, which is why a crocodile can afford to lose them. This animal did not. It grew 1,000 teeth and kept exactly those. And there is something quietly unsettling about a mouth that had no second chances in it. Against the comb, the upper jaw carries short teeth with spatulate crowns, set into a pad covered in small bony ossicles. The comb closes against a plate. Cerda and Codorniu describe the result carefully. The arrangement would stop food escaping between the teeth as the jaws shut. It is a filter, and it is one of the finest filters ever grown on a vertebrate skull. One direct piece of dietary evidence exists. In 2013, Laura Codorniu and colleagues reported stomach stones in 2 specimens. Those are the first gastroliths recorded for any pterosaur, and they point at small, hard-shelled animals going down whole. The pink is invented. Almost every reconstruction shows this pterosaur flamingo-colored, standing in shallow water, and there is no evidence for the color at all. Flamingo pink comes from carotenoids in the diet, and carotenoids are not known to survive fossilization. Every pigment result recovered from a pterosaur so far is melanin, which cannot produce that color. An illustrator's guess turned into something the audience now remembers as a fact. The rest of the life is unusually complete. Bone histology, published in 2008, shows rapid growth to about half adult size in the first 2 years, then sexual maturity, then slower growth for another 3 to 5 years, out to a wingspan around 2.5 meters. In 2004, the site produced an unhatched egg with the embryo still inside it. Among the first ever found, hatchlings come out about 1/4 of a meter across the wings, which is the span of a hand. A 2021 analysis put numbers on those hatchlings, aspect ratios, and wing loadings in the range of powered flyers. Humeri that are, for their size, among the strongest of any pterosaur ever measured. The authors read that as flight within days of hatching. Other specialists working on a Chinese pterosaur, known for more than 200 eggs, disagree, reading the embryos as under-ossified and the hatchlings as grounded. The argument is live, and neither side has closed it. So we have the whole animal. We have it as an embryo, as a hatchling, with a wingspan the length of a hand, as a 2-year-old and as an adult. And we can count its teeth one at a time. We have never found a meal. 750 specimens, 2 of them with stomach stones, and not one preserved mouthful of whatever the comb was built to catch. The machine survives in extraordinary detail. Whatever went through it does not. Number 7. The pterosaur that was pulled out of the sky. In 2009, in a Plattenkalk quarry northwest of Eichstätt in Bavaria, a slab was split open with 2 animals lying on it. It is catalogued a WWDCCSG 255 and held at the Wyoming Dinosaur Center in Thermopolis. Eberhard Frey and Helmut Tischlinger described it in the journal PLOS One in 2012, and they put a question mark in their own title. The first animal is a Rhamphorhynchus. It is a long-tailed pterosaur with forward-raking teeth that mesh into a basket when the jaws close, and a diamond vein at the end of a stiffened tail. Over 100 specimens are known, from hatchlings to adults, near 1.8 meters across, which makes it one of the best understood pterosaurs on Earth. The second animal is an Aspidorhynchus, a long-snouted armored fish of about the same length. Its jaws are closed on the pterosaur's left wing, level with the wrist. The jaws did not close on bone. They closed on membrane. That single detail is what the reconstruction turns on. The teeth are caught in the fibers of the wing itself, in the sheet of skin, muscle, and stiffening fiber that ran from the wing finger down to the ankle. A fish that size could not swallow a pterosaur. It also could not open its mouth and let go, because the fibers were wound through its teeth. Then there is what is inside the pterosaur. A small fish sits in its throat. It is articulated, its spine straight, its tail fin folded and pointing towards the mouth. And it shows no trace of digestion anywhere. It had just cleared the larynx. The pterosaur was in the middle of swallowing when the other animal hit it. And that is the disturbing part, because it fixes the timing to a matter of seconds. From that, the authors reconstruct an event rather than a portrait. The Rhamphorhynchus was flying low and feeding at the surface. The Aspidorhynchus came up from in front and took hold of the left wing. Neither could get free. Both went down together, through the water column, into the layer that killed them. The Solnhofen lagoons were stratified, fresher water above, dense hypersaline brine on the bottom. No oxygen in it, and nothing living down there at all. That is why slabs from this rock preserve wing membranes and tail veins and stomach contents, and why one Rhamphorhynchus has been published with what may be the only coprolite ever attributed to a pterosaur still lying against it. Nothing burrowed through a carcass on that floor. Nothing came to eat it. This is also the rock that taught Europe what the Jurassic sky held. About a dozen skeletons of Archaeopteryx have come out of these lagoons. And so did the specimen that Cosimo Alessandro Collini described in 1784. The first pterosaur anyone ever published. Collini could not work out what it was. He ruled out birds, ruled out bats, and concluded only that whatever it had been, it had probably come out of the sea. The best proof of that lethal bottom is not a pterosaur at all. It is a set of tracks. Horseshoe crabs washed into the basin, walked across the sediment while the brine killed them, and their bodies lie at the ends of their own trackways. The longest such track runs 9.7 meters and was made by an animal 12.7 centimeters across. Dean Lomax and Christopher Reiki published it in 2012. You can follow the entire walk, and the animal is still lying at the end of it, which is about as haunting as a fossil gets. The caution belongs here, and the authors gave it themselves. This is the fifth slab pairing these two species. In 3 of the 4 earlier ones, a complete Rhamphorhynchus simply lies beside the fish's jaws, and in one a pterosaur wing bone sits between them. And none of the 4 proves the pterosaur was alive when it was seized. The predation reading rests on this specimen, and specifically on the undigested fish in the throat. Why the fish itself died is called speculative in the paper. What we can actually read off the slab is the pterosaur's death. 1 block of limestone, 2 animals locked together, and a third one inside the second. 3/4 of the way down. Number 6. Yachi. A farmer named Wang Jianrong found it in a quarry near Mutudong village, in Qinglong County, Hebei Province. In 2007, it was sold to the Shandong Tianyu Museum of Nature, and a technician there named Ding Xiaoqing began taking the rock off it. What came out from under the matrix was not something anybody had a category for. Xu Xing and 9 colleagues published it in Nature in 2015, out of the Tiaojishan Formation, about 160 million years old. The animal itself is not alarming. It is a Scansoriopterygid, a small feathered dinosaur, pigeon-sized, something under 400 grams, with filaments over the body and a short, deep skull. Then there is the rod. Projecting back from each wrist is a long, gently curved, tapering bone. It is longer than the ulna. It is longer than the third finger. It has no counterpart in any other dinosaur ever described. And a decade on, nobody has settled what it is. The term used in the paper is styloform element, which is a way of naming an object without claiming to understand it. Between that rod and the fingers, in patches, there is membrane. The name is 2 syllables, and it is exact. Yo means wing. Chi means strange. At 4 letters, it is the shortest name any animal has been given under the rules of zoological nomenclature. The caution matters as much as the fossil does. The membrane survives in patches rather than as an outline. So every complete wing you have seen drawn on this animal is a reconstruction. The paper's own wording was carefully hedged, offering the intriguing possibility of membranous aerodynamic surfaces rather than a claim about them. 4 separate orientations for the rod have since been published. Swept backwards like a bat's finger, angled outwards like a pterosaur's pteroid, turned in towards the body, or held forwards to spread a hand membrane the way a gliding frog does. All 4 are on the same bone, in the same fossil. Then, in 2019, a second one turned up. Wang Min and colleagues described Ambopteryx longibrachtium in Nature from an articulated and nearly complete skeleton found in Liaoning, 3 million years older than the first. Membrane again, rod again. It was not a one-off, and it was not a preservation accident. A small family of Jurassic dinosaurs had grown a wing that was not made of feathers, and one of them died with stomach stones and bone fragments in its abdomen, which is not the gut of a hunter. And then somebody modeled it. In 2020, Thomas DeSecchi and colleagues re-imaged both fossils under laser-stimulated fluorescence and ran the aerodynamics in the journal iScience across 2 possible wing shapes, 3 mass estimates, and a range of drag assumptions. The best case, using the most generous numbers available anywhere in the set, gives a glide ratio of about 13:1, a sink rate of 0.8 of a meter per second, and a turning circle of nearly 22 meters. Change the assumptions even slightly, and the performance falls apart. Powered flight is out entirely under every configuration tested. Staying up was never the hard part. Getting off the ground was... Their phrase for the whole group was a poor, gliding dead end. That is worth sitting with, because it changes what these animals are. They are not a step on the road to birds. Birds were already being assembled in the same forests, in the same period, out of feathers, on very similar bones. This was a separate attempt at the same problem, running in parallel, using a completely different material, and it lost. There is something unsettling in the object itself, a wing built with obvious deliberation that we can now show barely worked. We have exactly 2 individuals of it, from 2 quarries, 3 million years apart. Everything else that lineage ever did is missing. Everything with a backbone in the air today runs on 2 designs: feathers on a bird's arm, or skin on a bat's hand. A third, the pterosaur wing, ran for 160 million years and is gone. The fourth is a slab in a museum in Shandong and another in a collection in Beijing, and it never got past a bad glide between trees. Every flying animal now alive is running one of the versions that beat it. Number 5. The giant vampire bat. Cueva del Guacharo runs deep into a mountain in Monagas, in northeastern Venezuela, nearly 2 kilometers in from the entrance, in a gallery named after a party of Italian cavers. A skull came out of the floor with a jaw and some limb bones beside it. Omar Linares had flagged material from that cave as a possible fossil vampire as early as 1968. The description came in 1988 from Gary Morgan, Linares, and Clayton Ray. The measurements are the entry point. The skull is 31.2 millimeters long. In the living common vampire bat, the same measurement runs between about 24 and 25.5. The humerus is 51 millimeters against an average of 37. In linear terms, the animal was somewhere around 1/4 to 1/3 larger than the vampire bat that exists now, which in a body that small is an enormous difference. The authors were clear about what they were naming. The specific epithet, they wrote, commemorates Count Dracula, the greatest human vampire of folklore. It is worth being exact about what a vampire bat does, because the popular version is wrong in the details. It does not suck. It lands short of the animal, walks in, and finds a warm spot using heat sensors in the nose. It shaves the hair away with its cheek teeth. Then it cuts a small divot out of the skin with the upper incisors, which have no enamel on them and stay razor sharp, and laps what runs out. The saliva carries an anticoagulant that stops the blood clotting. All of that depends on moving well on the ground, and vampires are the only bats known to run. It is worth saying what the fossil record of bats is like, because it makes any find like this stranger than it looks. Bats appear already finished. Every Eocene bat skeleton known is a competent flyer with a working hindwing, and there is no fossil glider anywhere at the base of the group. Molecular clocks put the origin of bats around 64 million years ago, and the oldest skeletons at about 52, leaving 12 million years of ancestry with almost nothing in it. Only 2 places on Earth produce complete bat skeletons, in the Wyoming quarries that are one of them. Among the millions of fish split out commercially, a bat turns up on average once every 2 years. Against that background, 8 confirmed localities for one extinct vampire is a rich record. They run from the Yucatan and Belize, through Venezuela and Brazil, down to the Buenos Aires coast, wider than the living species manages today. The problem is the date at the southern end, at Centinela del Mar, on the Argentine coast. A single upper canine, about a quarter larger than a living vampire's, came out of late Holocene sediment. Ulysses Pardinus and Eduardo Toni published it in 2000. The level it sat in is a few hundred years old, in the neighborhood of 1650. A 2023 study of that same coastal sequence tracks the disappearance of the giant vampire inside the last 5 centuries of the record. 2 honest limits go on that. The tooth is identified only as compared with Draculae, a tentative referral from a single canine, and the date belongs to the deposit rather than to the tooth. What survives both caveats is still a nightmarish thing to hold in the mind. On a coastline that European ships had already reached, something considerably larger than any vampire bat now alive appears to have still been feeding. On what? We have no idea. The standing hypothesis is that it specialized on the great Pleistocene mammals of South America, the ground sloths and the glyptodonts, and went down when they went. That is an argument from body size and from the coincidence of 2 extinctions. There are no bite marks. There are no gut contents, no isotope work, no ancient DNA from prey. Pardinus and Toni themselves proposed a much more ordinary menu of caviomorph rodents, viscacha, deer, and camelids, and nothing rules it out. 3 vampire bats are alive today, and all 3 are South American. The common vampire is the one that matters. And there are more of them now than there have ever been. Because the cattle that Europeans shipped into the Americas turned out to be exactly the right size to feed on. That is the whole difference between the 2 animals. One stayed a generalist and inherited a continent full of livestock. The other grew specialized and tied itself to the largest bodies in South America at the exact moment those bodies stopped existing. Number 4. The bird with teeth made of bone. In February 1983, construction work at Charleston International Airport in South Carolina cut into Oligocene rock and exposed bone. The block was too heavy to lift. A crew from the Charleston Museum, under the curator Albert Sanders, brought in a backhoe and took it out whole. Inside were a skull, wing bones, leg bones, and ribs, out of rock 25 to 28 million years old. The block went into the collection. There it stayed for 3 decades. Daniel Kcepka published the description in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2014. He named the animal Pelagorni sandersi, after the curator who had dug it out. The skeleton alone spans about 5.2 meters, wingtip to wingtip. Add the feathers, and the regressions give a range between 6 and 7.5 meters, with a working figure near 6.4. The largest wandering albatross alive today reaches about 3.5. It is the longest wingspan ever calculated for a bird. There is a ceiling on that kind of flight, and this animal sits on the wrong side of it. In 2009, Katsufumi Sato's team used tracking data from living soaring seabirds to work out a maximum size for the strategy. The answer came back at roughly 41 kilograms on a 5.1-meter wingspan. The mass estimate here, 22 to 40 kilograms, sits comfortably under that. The wings do not. It is a bird whose span runs past what the modeling allows, while weighing less than the model's own limit. Then there is the jaw. Down both jaw runs a row of sharp spikes, tall cones alternating with shorter needles, the full length of the beak. They are not teeth. No enamel, no dentine, no sockets, and no replacement, because they are outgrowths of the jawbone itself. Histology, published in 2013, found them hollow, thin-walled, and heavily remodeled, with poor mechanical properties. In life, they sat under the horn of the beak, so nothing was flying around with bare bone showing. They cannot cut. What they can do is hold something soft and slippery still, long enough for it to go down whole. That is the exact problem a squid presents to a bird. But here is where the reconstruction turns over. Koepka's model made this a dynamic soarer, an albatross scaled up, pulling energy out of the wind gradient over the waves. In 2022, a team led by Yusuke Goto remodeled the same skeleton in PNAS Nexus and got the opposite answer. At the heavier mass estimates, the bird needed stronger winds than any living dynamic soarer requires. Their reconstruction is a thermal soarer instead, circling in rising air over open water, closer in behavior to a frigate bird. The most famous fact about the longest-winged bird ever found is the part of the paper that did not survive. Getting airborne is a separate argument, and it is not settled either. A standing takeoff by flapping is almost certainly out of reach at that span. The hind limbs are short and stout, and probably webbed, set for pushing off water rather than walking on land. The likeliest launch is off the sea surface, or down a slope into a headwind. The family behind it is the strangest part of all. In 2019, Gerald Mayer and Paul Schofield described the oldest and most primitive of them from Waipara in New Zealand, about 62 million years old. It is gull-sized. It already has the pseudo-teeth, so the bony jaw came first, and the enormous wings came afterwards, which is the reverse of how the group is usually explained. From there, the family runs to about 2.5 million years ago in Morocco, 60 million years of one body plan on every ocean on the planet. Material from Seymour Island in Antarctica shows 5 and 6 meter wingspans already present in the Eocene. The gigantism was not a late flourish. It was the normal condition for most of the family's existence. Why they ended is not known. Cooling oceans, shifting currents, the rebuilding of marine food webs, overspecialization on prey they could only take at the surface. All of these have been proposed, and none demonstrated. What is not in question is that the space stayed empty. What empties a way of life that worked for 60 million years, and then keeps it empty afterwards? We cannot answer that. The longest wingspan over any ocean today is roughly half what one of these birds carried, and it has been that way for 2.5 million years. Number 3. The eagle that hunted the moa. In 1871, a taxidermist at the Canterbury Museum named Frederick Fuller was working the bone deposits in a drained swamp on the Glenmark estate, in the north of New Zealand's South Island. What he brought up went to Julius von Haast, who named the animal Harpagornis murai after the landowner. The genus means grappling hook bird. Females reach somewhere around 15 kilograms, and possibly more. The wingspan is 2.5 to 3 meters. The ratio between those two figures is the whole animal. A wedge-tailed eagle carries a comparable span at a fraction of the weight. This bird was hauling an enormous load on wings that were, for its mass, short. That is not a soaring build. It is a bird for one short, violent flight from a perch, inside closed forest. The lower jaw is 11.4 centimeters long, against a little over 7 in the largest eagles alive. The rear claw may have reached 11 centimeters, which is the scale of a big cat's. What makes this result extraordinary is the timescale behind it. In 2005, Michael Bunce and colleagues published ancient DNA from 2 fossil specimens in Pellis Biology, run against 16 living eagles. The closest relatives turned out to be the little eagle and the booted eagle. Both weigh about a kilogram. Both span roughly a meter and a fifth. The genetic distance back to their common ancestor puts the split somewhere between 700,000 and 1.8 million years ago. The author's own conclusion is that the speed and magnitude of the increase in body mass seems unique within vertebrate lineages. A 1-kilogram bird became a 15-kilogram bird. In evolutionary terms, it did that in almost no time at all. The prey is written on the prey. More than a dozen moa pelves carry perforations and rents that match the talons. The figured example is a giant MOA from Glencreef Swamp in Canterbury. A South Island giant, MOA stood up to 3.6 meters and weighed as much as 249 kilograms. The eagle went in at the pelvis, which is where the kidneys sit, and the bill was long enough to reach them. It is one of the most brutal pieces of predation in the vertebrate fossil record, and it is recorded in holes punched through solid bone. Whether it hunted or scavenged was argued for a century. The argument ended in 2 stages. In 2009, Paul Schofield and Ken Ashwell put the skull through a CT scanner and rebuilt the brain, the eyes and the ears. The brain is absolutely larger than any living eagle's, and relatively small for a body that size, which they read as a skull, failing to keep pace with a body that had grown too fast. The sensory proportions match active predators, not carrion feeders. Then, in 2021, a team led by Annika van Heteren ran the shape and mechanics of skull, beak, and talons against living scavengers and predators. Their title settled it. It killed like an eagle and ate like a condor. The talons could take extremely high loads. The brain case was vulture-shaped. It brought down animals far larger than itself, then fed into the carcass the way a condor does. The end is dated by the prey rather than by the bird. The MOA were gone by about 1445, within roughly a century and a half of Polynesian settlement, and the eagle is assumed to have followed inside a generation or two. There is no radiocarbon date on a Haast's eagle bone anywhere near that period. The 2 most recent published dates on eagle bone are around 1800 and 2900 years old. It left the fossil record long before it left the world. The extinction of the largest eagle that ever flew is an inference we draw from the collapse of its food. Maori tradition records a giant bird, the puakai, that killed people. Identifying that bird with this one is popular, and it is genuinely contested, not least because puakai accounts come from the North Island, and this eagle is known only from the south. The lineage did not end with it. The little eagle is still flying over Australia, about a kilogram, entirely unremarkable, taking rabbits and lizards. That is the same branch, wound back to where it started. New Zealand had no land mammals, so birds took the ground, and one of them grew until it could kill the largest of the others. Number 2, Hatzegopteryx. About 70 million years ago, in the closing stretch of the Cretaceous, there was an island in the Tethys Sea where Transylvania is now. The animals on it are famous for being small. Magurosaurus is a titanosaur that never got much past the size of a horse. Telmatosaurus is a dwarf hadrosaur. Zalmoxes is a stocky plant eater a couple of meters long. This is the classic signature of an island fauna, with large animals shrinking generation by generation into the space available. There is no large predatory dinosaur anywhere in that fauna. Not one has ever been found. The holotype of the animal that filled the gap consists of 2 fragments from the back of a skull and the damaged upper end of a left humerus. Eric Buffetot, Don Grigorescu, and Zoltan Chiki described it in 2002 from the Densus Keula Formation near Valioara in the northwest of the Hateg Basin. The species name, Thambama, means terror. The bone is the first thing that is wrong with it. A pterosaur bone is normally a thin-walled tube with air inside. This one has a spongy interior, with cavities up to 10 millimeters long separated by a mesh of fine struts. And the describing authors compared the texture to expanded polystyrene. The skull fragments are stout and heavily ridged, where muscle attached. This is a giant flyer built, in places, to take load. Confirmation came 15 years later, out of a single neck bone. In 2017, Darren Naish and Mark Whitten published specimen EME315 in PeerJ. It is a neck vertebra, 240 millimeters long as preserved, nearly as wide as it is long, with a socket at one end 150 millimeters across, except this one is different. In every other giant Haastdarkid, the wall of a neck vertebra is 2.6 millimeters thick or less, because the whole group is built to be as light as it can possibly be made. This vertebra has walls between 4 and 6 millimeters along the underside, and the space inside is packed with a fine chambered bone instead of open air. Run the loading numbers, and it comes out able to take something on the order of 5 to 10 times the animal's own body weight sideways. The equivalent bone in Aramborgiania, the Jordanian giant with a 780 millimeter vertebra and a neck around 3 meters long, tops out near half a body weight. It could not have supported its own weight in that direction. What makes the Transylvanian animal unsettling is what the rest of the anatomy does to that number. Its neck ran somewhere around half to 60% of the length you would expect on a giant Haastdarkid. The skull was roughly half a meter wide at the jaw joints. The wingspan was probably 10 to 12 meters. This is not a crane scaled up. It is a short, thick, heavily reinforced head and neck on a 10-meter flying frame, on an island with nothing else large enough to contest it. Nation Whitten's own phrasing is that it was the largest terrestrial predator known in Eastern Europe at the end of the Cretaceous by some margin, with the potential to tackle prey too large to swallow whole. Terrestrial is the word doing the work in that sentence. In 2008, Whitten and Naish had worked through the possibilities for how giant Haastdarkids fed and eliminated most of them. Not skimming the water, because the jaw is the wrong shape. Not probing sediment, because the neck will not bend that way and the bill carries no pressure sensors. Not wading, because the feet are far too small. What they were left with was stork-like foraging on the ground. These animals hunted on foot, wings folded, and used flight to get from one hunting ground to the next. At least 3 Haastdarkid species were sharing that island at the same time. All of that rests on 4 bones. 2 pieces from the back of a skull, half of one arm bone, and a single vertebra out of a neck. From an animal that sat at the top of an entire ecosystem for millions of years. There is no skeleton. There is no complete skull. Everything we have of the terror of Hatzeg would fit inside a small crate. For most of the Mesozoic, the largest predator on any piece of land was a theropod dinosaur. On Hatzeg, there was no theropod, and the job did not go unfilled. It went to something that had spent 100 million years evolving its way off the ground, and that came back down to do it on foot. Number 1. Quetzalcoatlus northropi. In 1971, a graduate student named Douglas Lawson was walking awash in the Javelina Formation in Big Bend National Park. In West Texas, prospecting for sauropod bone, he found something eroding out of a slope that was hollow inside. And hollow, in a way, sauropod bone is not. He and Juan Langston Jr. went back and took out a wing. Lawson published it in Science in March 1975 under the title Pterosaur from the Latest Cretaceous of West Texas, Discovery of the Largest Flying Creature. The rock is 67 to 66 million years old, which puts the animal in the last million years before the asteroid. The size went straight into legend, and it went in wrong. Lawson's own preferred figure was around 15.5 meters, with alternatives of 11 and 21 in the same paper. Over the next 15 years, published wingspans for the genus ranged from 5.2 meters to nearly 26, depending on the method used. In 2010, Mark Whitten and Michael Habib put the ceiling for any pterosaur at 10 to 11 meters. The monograph that finally described the material settled on almost exactly 10. That monograph took 50 years. It ran in December 2021 as a memoir of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, 6 papers, filling a whole supplement of one journal. Langston had died in 2013 and appears on 2 of them posthumously. Almost everything the public thinks it knows about this animal was published half a century after the bones came out of the ground. The smaller species named in that work is Quetzalcoatlus lawsoni, after the man who found the genus, and it is the reason we know anything at all. More than 200 specimens, a mandible 94 centimeters long, the best skull the genus has, on a 4.5-meter wingspan. Scale a body like that, up to 10 meters, and the shoulder stands 2.5 to 3 meters off the ground, with the head carried above 4, on foot. This animal met a giraffe at eye level. How something that size got airborne is the central argument. And it is genuinely open. In 2008, Habib measured humerus against femur across 3 pterosaurs. In birds over 500 grams, the leg bone is the stronger of the 2, because birds run and jump into the air. In every pterosaur he tested, it was the other way round, and strongly so. Giant pterosaur arm bones also get proportionally stronger as the animals get larger, carrying more than twice the failure force expected of a bird the same size. On those numbers, a 250-kilogram animal could clear the ground from a standing start, with no headwind and no slope, driving off the forelimbs. The 2021 monograph argues a leap off the hind legs is also plausible. Nobody has closed it. The skeptics deserve their space. In 2009, Katsufumi Sato's team calculated that an animal over about 41 kilograms with narrow ocean-going wings could not sustain that flight, though they noted this one probably soared like a vulture rather than an albatross. In 2010, Donald Henderson modeled it at 544 kilograms and argued for flightlessness, until Witten and Habib showed the torso in his model was around 3 times too long. Corrected, his own method returns about 240. The neck is where the engineering shows. In 2021, a team led by Cariad Williams CT scanned an age-darkened neck vertebra from Morocco and found a tube inside a tube. The canal carrying the spinal cord runs down the center, connected to the outer wall by fine rods radiating outwards like the spokes of a wheel, set helically along the bone so that they cross each other like the treads of a spiral staircase. Their modeling found that as few as 50 of them raise the load the vertebra can carry before buckling by up to 90%. A 3-meter neck holding a head in the air is not solid bone. It is a scaffold, wound in a spiral, carrying an absurd amount of load for its weight. But here's where the record thins out. The holotype of Quetzalcoatlus northropi, catalogued TMM41450-3, consists only of a giant partial left wing, the lower end of a humerus, the upper ends of the radius and ulna, some wrist bones, the pteroid, part of a metacarpal, 3 partial finger bones, no skull, no neck, no hip, no leg, no torso, no tail. Cataloged alongside it is a lot of roughly 1,000 unidentified fragments. The truly haunting part is what that does to every picture of it. Every full-body reconstruction of the largest flying animal in the history of this planet. Every museum mount, every documentary shot of it launching off a floodplain, is a Quetzalcoatlus lawsoni enlarged. The small cousin, blown up until it fits a wing. The wing is real. You could stand next to it because it is measured, cataloged, and held in a collection in Austin, somewhere in West Texas. In the last million years of the Cretaceous, an animal with a 10-meter wingspan folded that limb, walked on it, and drove itself off the ground with it. Everything else about the largest flyer that ever lived is a careful argument built on a smaller relative. That is the price of the air. And every animal on this list paid it. A body that flies is a body built as thin as it can possibly be made. Hollowed out, strutted, pared back to the last gram that will still carry a load. It works beautifully. It also does not fossilize. The sky has been occupied for more than 300 million years, and what almost all of it left us is wings. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.